Welcome. On behalf of RZIM Canada and INTRICITI, welcome to Reimagine, an opportunity for us to explore life's new questions. As a means of introduction, my name is Alana Walker-Carpenter, and I will be your host today. Whether you have a little faith, a lot of faith, or no faith at all, we hope that this will be a safe landing ground for us to be able to explore leadership in the context of crisis. For those of you who are engaged on social media, our hashtag is Reimagine 2020. And for those who desire to ask a question today, simply click on the right-hand side of your screen and that will come directly to us. It is my privilege to introduce to you both of our guests today. Firstly, Michael Ramsden, President of RZIM. Michael is leading the international operation of RZIM. He also speaks globally, whether in a business setting, a political setting, or other settings. Prior to being in Atlanta and leading the RZIM international team, he was in the UK as a regional leader, and prior to that worked in the investment industry, and also taught law and economics at one of the local universities. Michael is married and has 3 adult children. And our industry leader today is Thomas Caldwell. Thomas is the founder and chairman of Caldwell Securities. Tom graduated from McGill University in 1965 and has been involved in the investment industry ever since, both involved in the investment industry and the community at large. Tom has received numerous honors, both for his involvement in the investment industry and in the community. In 2002, he received Her Majesty's Golden Jubilee Medal. In 2003, he received the Order of Canada, Canada's highest honor. And in 2014, Tom was inducted into the Investment Industry Hall of Fame. Tom is married to Dorothy, and together they have 2 adult children and 6 grandchildren. Welcome, Michael. Welcome, Tom. We're delighted to have you with us today. I will begin by asking our guests each a question. We will transition to Michael for his live talk, and then Tom and I will join back for this opportunity for us to engage in a robust conversation about leadership. So Michael, I'll begin with you. You have been a regional leader with RZIM. You have recently transitioned into this global role, managing the global operations, nonetheless, all during a pandemic. What have been the opportunities and challenges in leading during this time?
Well, thank you for the question. And it is a challenge, partly because my preferred leadership style is to gather people together in rooms. And especially when there are tough decisions to be made, and keep everybody there long enough until we've figured it out, and we're all on the same page together. And when you're dealing with multiple time zones, that the easiest way to overcome that is to actually make people travel. And obviously, in the kind of situation we're in now, trying to juggle everybody's time zones and do everything remotely introduces a very different dynamic. So apart from the logistics of just trying to physically move from one continent to another when all of your travel is being restricted, you also realize there are a lot of other issues which are going on too. And we sometimes forget, we think of leaders as people, we define them in terms of their gifts and their abilities, which of course is key, one of the key reasons why they're there. But we often forget the human side. And when you put people in a situation like this, people are going to process those challenges very, very, very differently. So then there comes a role, I think, for all leaders at some point where they have to play a sort of a shepherding role as well, trying to figure out where key members of the team actually are, what help they may need, how you can help them process and support them so they can function at the top of their game. My experience has been, if you can have the people around you doing really well, people think you're doing well as a leader, but actually all you've done is you've enabled the people around you to do really well. And you are in the embarrassing situation of being given credit for things you haven't necessarily actually simply brought about yourself. So it has been very challenging, but I think that personal side and the need to find ways to personally support team when you're not in the same location as them, and you don't have the policy even to fly and see them at a time of crisis, that's a complicated thing. And I'm glad for the technology. I'm sure the phone would be worse. There's a tiredness that comes to working with Zoom we've had to acknowledge too. And I'm sure some of the people on this call and on this conference, it was exciting to begin with. And then you realize, you know what, there's an energy required to do this kind of medium communication too. And then you have to learn now a new pattern, a new rhythm, along with all of the new opportunities that come in your wake.
Thank you, Michael. And I think we really have had an opportunity to see the personal side of leaders, and that has just made a significant difference in the lives of others. Tom, I'm going to transition over to you. Leading in a crisis is not unfamiliar to you. You have seen multiple market meltdowns. You have seen 9/11. In fact, you were in New York on September 11th, 2001. When we're looking at both of those crises, from your seat, what can we garner from that particular experience of 9/11 as we lead others during this unexpected season?
Well, I think one of the important ingredients of leadership at all levels is quelling one's emotions. September 11th was quite a bit different. It was a short, sharp, cataclysmic shock that people were incredulous. It happened quickly. It was a surprise to everyone involved, obviously. I had a meeting at the World Trade Center that day. Mercifully, my meeting was later, early afternoon, so I was in no physical danger. But the shock was nonetheless there, and you know, it was for some years later. I couldn't, when I was going to the New York Stock Exchange where I owned seats, I couldn't even walk past the hole. I had to go by it. But it was interesting how the shock went from amazement to defiance to anger to sadness, because I would be going back and forth to New York every week or so right after that. But if you look at financial markets, there was a tremendous collapse the day that happened. But literally within a year, that market was back up again into new high territory. So we can absorb shocks. We've had terrible, terrible cataclysmic events, a financial crisis, so many of these things happening over the years. You have to look through it. You have to look beyond it. What's happening here? When is this going to resolve? COVID is different. It was slow unraveling. It affects everybody personally at some level or not. I think there'll be lots of books written about this later and how humanity react to this situation. I think there's a level of depression. There's a level of stress that over and above the usual people have in their lives. But there's this other factor, and it's affecting. But you can see it in traffic. You can see people driving differently. You can see lots of things going on. The interesting thing, though, that's happening, governments need to focus these days on inflation, cost of living inflation. Well, that's a non-factor. What is actually happening is asset value inflation. So what's happening is, if you look at, say, financial markets, people are moving from cash, where you can get zero return to speak of, and going for assets, whether they be real estate, whether they be common shares or equity of some variety. So the reaction is a little bit different. I think, though, the people are looking beyond, saying, well, there will be a solution coming, whether it be in a vaccine, certainly definitely in treatments. If you went into a hospital in March, there was a good chance you were not going to make it. If you go into a hospital now, there's a pretty good chance you're going to make it. So they've got more focus on treatments. So we are starting to look beyond it. To my mind, the crossover these days is the precautions being taken and the damage from the slowdown, from the shutdown. There's going to be a crossover where people are suffering in many ways, including fatalities, because of shutdown. So that's a difficult decision, and it's a tough one that people are going to have to make either individually or collectively. So it's different. One is slow rolling, impacting you personally. 9/11 affected people because they could see it on television. And if you're on an airplane, you got diverted, or if you're in New York, you got stranded. But the world moved on. The one interesting thing I think I mentioned to you is before the day was out on September 11th, there were people on street corners in New York selling whistles at exorbitant prices for $10 for a whistle. And one of our partners bought me a whistle. I said, "What's that for?" And he said, "Well, in case a building falls on you." And so, so do I get a cab with a whistle or something? But my point here is that even before the catastrophe was over, people were seeing beyond it and seeing opportunities. That might be callous, but still, that too is part of the human condition. Different, but just different.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. So essentially, one of the key differences is that this affects all of us at some level, on a personal level, and that we just have a responsibility, especially as leaders, to think beyond. How can we lead beyond? What does post-pandemic leadership look like? Thank you, Tom. Tom and I are going to skirt off, and we're going to invite Michael to share with us about how do we lead in difficult times, and then in 10-15 minutes, we will rejoin and continue the conversation. Over to you, Michael.
Thank you very much. And I'm really looking forward to our conversation later. What I'd love to do is just take 3 things, and actually I could easily take 10, of things which have been underlying this, which when you put COVID on top have suddenly created what feels like a very unusual set of circumstances, but with a huge amount of opportunity too, I think, when we actually see it rightly, and also some hope. But it was the writer G.K. Chesterton who many years ago said that when political leaders speak, we very often use medical language and we'll say our country's sick and we need to make it better. But he pointed something very interesting out. He said there's a big difference between political and medical science. In medical science, when you go to hospital, the doctors disagree about what the root cause is. Why are you ill? What illness are they dealing with? But all the doctors agree what a healthy body looks like. So the doctors by necessity may send you home with 1 leg less, but they will never, in a strange fit of creative rapture, send you home with 1 leg more. So all the doctors are agreed on this is what is good. It's about what has gone wrong that they fight about. He said, but in political science, it seems to be the other way around. Everyone's agreed there's something wrong, but they can't agree on what is good. And as a result, he says, what one group proposes as a solution, another group sees as even worse than the problem that it seeks to solve. Now, the consequence of that is that we start to tear our eyes out over that. And we've seen that where in our developed world has there been a clear uniting sense of this is what is good, and this is the ultimate goal that we should all be heading for. But what we're disagreeing about is what the actual real problems are. We've been pulled apart for a while because of that. A UVA professor very famously made a remark that there are also events in our past which we feel have never been dealt with, and it's been simmering under the attention, and it's also exploded into life. And a Japanese author by the name of Ishiguro very famously wrote a book a few years ago in which he said there would come a time when quick-tongued men would make ancient grievance rhyme with current complaint, and the result would be war and mayhem. And most democracies around the world right now are struggling with this issue. Things which are in their past where people feel they have a complaint, they feel it's been unresolved, they feel there's some huge tension there, and again, they feel that they're being pulled apart as a result. 2 years ago, a major German think tank did a piece of research on democracy perception, and they interviewed 125,000 people in 50 different countries. And interestingly, 64% of people in advanced democracies said, my government never or rarely does anything that benefits me. And just in case you're wondering who came out bottom of the table, it was oppressive countries such as Austria, Sweden, Denmark, and Portugal, which goes to show there's a huge amount of cynicism just about leadership within our nations as well. Now, you take those kinds of tensions, and there are a lot of others that we could meaningfully address and maybe throw into the conversation too. But all of that is going on, and we're wrestling with questions of identity, history, meaning, and now you put COVID on top of it. And we're facing a set of challenges we haven't faced before. And this is where I think one writer on leadership in particular has something very interesting to say by the name of Hefferts. And he says at times of crisis, it's very easy to confuse technical and adaptive challenges. And he points out that they're very different. In a technical crisis, there is a problem that needs to be solved, and the means by which we can solve it are well known. And actually, strong command and control and direction of resources will easily overcome it. But in adaptive challenges, you're dealing with problems which you don't understand, solutions are unknown, and it feels like the very basis of the culture itself is being challenged, and the norms by which we normally behave and so on are also being called into question. Fascinatingly, he gives a really interesting example of this out of the life of Moses. Now, I was intrigued by this because a year before reading this, I was speaking in Ukraine at the time of their presidential elections and meeting with some of their candidates. And I shared with them that there was a moment in the life of Moses where the people come and complain and they say to him, it would be better for us to have been slaves than die here in the desert. And by any objective measure, that's a faulty analysis. It's not true they're better off making bricks without straw than actually having freedom but being stuck in the desert. So by an objective measure, they're wrong. The trouble is they're not comparing what they currently have with what they used to have. They're comparing what they currently have with what they expected to have. And that's one of the challenges we have right now. How do you deal with the expectation gap that people now feel? And how do you lead at a time of crisis without creating a set of false expectations and then set up a deeper set of disappointments? But what Hefes pointed out was something slightly different. He said, Moses was asked that question twice. Twice the people came to him and said, it would be better for us to have been in this terrible situation we were before than the situation we are in now. The first time, Moses has no problem answering. The second time he's asked the same question, he hands in his resignation in pretty dramatic terms. He basically says, God, please kill me, because death would be preferable to having to lead in this instance. And that's more or less exactly what he says word for word. And the question then comes, why could he deal with the problem the first time round, and the second time round it feels so overwhelming that he wants to be permanently removed from his position of responsibility of leadership? What's the difference? And the answer is the first one was a technical challenge, and he could see a way through for it to be dealt with. The second one was adaptive. The problem now wasn't the food they were complaining about. The problem was now the people. It was the people that were going to have to change. And what we're dealing with in the COVID crisis is something that's more of the adaptive problem. There is a lot that we didn't know. We're learning to know more, but it's challenging our culture and our norms, our normal everyday practices. I mean, I would start every day when I met someone new by shaking their hand. I never realized what a privilege it was until I had to stop doing it. I just thought we are being forced to change our patterns of behavior, the way we act, the way we believe, and we're not sure where the clear end in sight actually is. And so that is now why we're in such a difficult question. And then that then raises two other related questions that leadership has to then think through. Number one, as a leader, where do I draw the strength and the encouragement and the hope that I need to lead well? And that's the wall that Moses ran into the second time round. Where do you draw that strength from? As one person said, if your output exceeds your input, then your upkeep will be your downfall. Where is it that we actually have that? The second thing then is where do we also develop clarity of vision, which then helps channel our emotion and keep things under control so that during time of crisis, everyone doesn't go into panic. Because when leadership goes into panic and starts responding out of fear, people will pick up on that too. And sadly, a lot of our response to the current crisis is being driven out of fear rather than love. I can't speak for what the messaging in Canada has been about COVID, but in the UK, the initial messaging, which they then changed, was we won't let anybody die, and we'll do everything we can to stop anybody dying, because that's the worst thing that can happen here. Well, that's a very bold promise for any government to make. How can you possibly keep it? Now, the challenge then was, of course, everyone responded out of fear. Now, interestingly, also out of the life of Moses, there are rules about quarantine. And the people are told to quarantine if they have an infectious disease, to put themselves out of the camp, not to spread it. But the motive is very different. They don't quarantine out of fear of loss of their own life. They quarantine out of love for their compatriots. They don't want to spread something to someone else. So out of love and concern for their community and those around them, they'll take themselves out. So it's not actually about them. It's about the community and what does it mean to work well in that community. And there is a difference in any society or organization between the outworking of fear and the outworking of love and compassion. Those things actually look very, very different. And I think that's where we need, at this point, a bigger vision to actually help us act, not out of fear for ourselves, but out of love and compassion for those around us, and even care for the country and the organizations we're in. What does it mean to serve? Because that's the kind of thing that also inspires, certainly what in England we used to refer to as the wartime mentality. The simple truth is, in wartime, you can't guarantee everybody's safety, but there is something worth fighting for, and there is something that's worth to fight against. In COVID, we're in the same situation. It's just that the warriors are different. If you're going to the pharmacy every day to sell medicine, or you're stocking the shelves in a supermarket so people can buy food, you are actually assuming more risk because of the nature of what we're facing. But there's something heroic in that because it makes all of life possible. So there is also now a huge time amongst global leadership and also national and local leadership how to inspire the confidence and the hope, and stress again that there are some things which are worth doing and worth doing well, even if they come at great cost, because there is a benefit to the group with which we're in, even if it may come at great expense to ourselves. And it's those kinds of leaders who've inspired that kind of response that we look on most favorably as we look over our shoulders, not those who created an aura of panic or fear, but those who could bring a sense of vision and hope. And that's essentially what we need, because we don't know how long this will go, but there are sources of strength. Now, of course, in the life of Moses, that basically threw him back on the source of strength in his own life, and he had to draw that from God and not himself. And that is a question in that sense all of us have to raise as we go through this. Where do we draw that strength from ourselves so we can lead well, so that we can be those who are willing to serve and also hopefully inspire service in the lives of others? I say that there are about 7 other factors that we could throw in here too, very legitimately. I'm sure we'll pick up on those in the conversation, but I just throw those out to start with.
Thank you, Michael. Certainly, I think we can all relate to just having to adapt as leaders. I love what you said just about our responsibility as a leader, encouragement, offering strength, offering hope, operating in a spirit of love and not fear, extending care, extending compassion, having clarity of vision, and propelling people forward in hope. Thank you, Michael. I'm going to welcome Tom back to our conversation now. Tom, I'm going to start by asking a couple of questions to you. The first is this misconceived notion that markets actually dictate leadership rather than leadership dictating the markets. And I'm hoping from your extensive experience within the investment industry, you can clarify that preconceived notion for us today.
Well, I think you have, it's like much of life. Life is going to teach you. We can come at it with our own preconceived notions. And that is a form of arrogance, I guess. But I keep joking about markets. I sometimes say to people in this industry, and our industry is made up of a significant number of egomaniacs. Michael can speak to this, having been in the investment industry. I always keep saying the nice part about humility is if you don't seek it, stick around. It'll be coming. And one of the first things markets teach you is humility, that you're going to be wrong sometimes. You're going to make mistakes. And, I always keep saying there's, it's nice to be right. It's terrible to have to be right. And I have to get up each day. I look at significant positions I have in markets, and I have to question myself. I have to bounce ideas off of other people. And I keep joking, I haven't had an original idea in years. I take bits of other people's ideas and refine them and work off those. So I think the first lesson markets will teach you is humility. It'll probably enable you to build an inquiring mind, to look behind things, look behind what is obvious, to try to see the world in a slightly different light. And I think that's a very important thing in life, certainly in leadership. You have to look at things slightly differently. You can't go on what is immediately in front of you. When I was at Merrill Lynch many years ago, I said, I call what I call the Merrill Lynch rule. Take nothing at face value. There's always something else. And I was referring to politics, corporate politics in those days, but it's looking behind what's going on. I mean, as I said earlier as our chat, if you watch CNN or you watch Fox, if you just watch those exclusively, you're going to mess up your thinking. You're not thinking flexibly enough. And I add in Al Jazeera to give me a better worldview kind of thing. So I think it teaches everything from humility to inquiring mind, possibly a degree of cynicism, and realism. If you come at markets with greed or fear as dominant factors, and I've been in this business long enough to have seen many of its participants end up taking their own lives because of fear or greed or whatever. So it deals with the human condition. It's like I don't mean to sound what I do trivial, but during difficult times, I often say to our partners, remember, this is investment industry by Parker Brothers. Nobody dies here. The thing is, you have to. It is a process. It is a profession. It is an occupation that at the end of the day, we probably go home having learned more about ourselves than anything else. So I think it's the teacher.
Oh, thank you, Tom. So looking behind to propel ourselves forward, coming to the table with a sense of curiosity, and also coming to the table with humility and just an open posture to learning. Tom, I'm going to put this next question to you, and then I'll move over to you, Michael. Tom, most of economists have indicated that this is not going to be a flat line recovery, and I think we're seeing that play out right now in real time. What non-financial advice would you give to leaders in their strategic planning models. Essentially, how far out can leaders plan right now?
Well, first off, I mentioned cynicism, and that and economists tend to go together in my thinking. So that having been said, I think I find in tough situations, and I've been in a couple in my life, there's two things I do. I believe in prayer for clarity of thought, direction, but also I shrink my time frames. What can I do now? What is a good decision in the now? Yes, I have a broader, longer term view, but I try to make good decisions almost on a daily basis. I think one of the things I heard a good line about this pandemic. Someone once said, if you've seen one pandemic, you've seen one pandemic. There are no experts. This is new territory for everyone, including Dr. Fauci, everyone. We're going along as we see events evolve. And people are going to make mistakes. We talked about the presidential election. Everybody's talking about everybody else's mistakes. This is new territory. It's a battle that's going on, and people are going to make mistakes. We have to give people the respect that they're trying to do the best they can with the information they have that day. So I would suggest, for me, I take our business one day at a time. As part of being a leader, one of my favorite characters in the Bible is Barnabas. He's an encourager, to be an encourager, to instill a bit of calm. As a leader, there's a multiplier effect. If I come into the office in a bad mood, I can have everybody at each other's throats in 2 minutes. Or if I come into the office frightened or scared, I can so panic really quickly. My job is to be like a dial tone, make decisions, be calm, and not overreact to stuff. And frankly, I do feel that both the politicians and the media are adding to the tension of these times. That would be my view.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tom. And I think you've said something poignant. People are going to make mistakes. I think we've all made mistakes, and we're simply all trying to figure it out. We need to extend a level of grace.
I got that message from Big Bird. Everybody makes mistakes, so why not you?
I love it.
I'm very deep in these matters.
Fantastic. And we're all just trying to make the very best decisions, and our responsibility to encourage. Our responsibility to encourage. I think in many ways right now, we need to be chief encouragement officers. Michael, this next question is for you. Struggle is not failure. Yet some leaders are risk adverse, and they simply are afraid of failure. And this really isn't a time for us to hold on to our fear. How can we cultivate an environment that is safe for these leaders who are so fearful of failure, so we can maximize our innovation, especially as we're heading into this last quarter of the year?
That's a very good question, because adaptive crises respond to innovation. And that's why the inspiration is so important, because you're now saying, look, so much has changed. So let's reimagine something we thought before. Who would have thought so many businesses would have been looking at remote working as a good idea? I mean, it was being touted, people were experimenting with it, but this has accelerated something that happened and made some people reevaluate their position. So I think with the fear thing, I think Tom's already spoken about some of this so well. Fear of failing is crippling. One thing I've tried to say to my team is, look, mistakes are expensive. So you can't afford not to learn from them, number one. And number two, learn from other people's mistakes. Sometimes it's not a bad idea to let someone else pay, and then you learn from what they did wrong. But either way, it'll be wrong not to learn from it. So I think the idea of then being open and honest about our mistakes so that we can learn from them, allowing people then to challenge us. And that's why humility, I think, is so important, as Thomas said. Interestingly, Moses is regarded around the world by Muslims, Jews, Christians as one of the greatest leaders who walked on the face of the planet. He's also described as the most humble man who ever lived. So who would have thought humility would have been the key characteristic that marked out a leader of such stature? And it is because then of what you're allowing to come into you and to learn. So I think if we understand that even when we fail, there's the opportunity to learn, to improve. And if it's handled rightly, it can even have a unifying effect in the team. If you're going to go down a path of denial or anger, you're going to split everybody apart. If you're willing to be open and then say, right, what can we learn from this? Stand firm where you need to stand firm, and then acknowledge where you yourself have gone wrong, it's going to set you up better for the next time round. Otherwise, you're going to simply keep repeating the same Arizona over. And that fear thing is really, that is the thing that cripples all of us. And I think we do need to overcome some of the fear that we currently see. Of course, it makes sense to be very careful what we do now, but I saw England's chief statistician on a program who has been quoted by every political party to prove their point in opposite directions. And he did an interview which really made me smile, because he also brought a sense of perspective. People are losing their lives, but at one point he said, how many people are there under the age of 15 in this country? The interviewer didn't know. The answer was 10 million. He said, how many at this point have died from COVID? I think the answer was 2. He then said, how many people under the age of 25 in this country? And the interviewer didn't know. He said 17.5 million. How many have died from COVID? Again, blank stare. He said 34. He said, you need to understand what 34 out of 17.5 statistically, out of 7.5 million means statistically, and how little weight you can put on that. He says, so in an age where people are suffering from anxiety and depression anyway, especially if they're young, some of what we're doing through the media in terms of the message that we're communicating is simply making it worse. So I think that's what Thomas was saying about encouragement being so important. At times when we feel fearful and we're going to make a bad decision based out of fear rather than some other reason, to have someone to encourage us just to take a step back and to try to think about it differently. And at times also to learn to recognize the opportunity in that challenge. That's what a lot of great leadership is actually made out of. And it's a very, very famous story, but the guy who sank, the captain of the Titanic, as we all know, he was chosen for the lack of mistakes he'd made in the past. When he was on that voyage, interestingly, there were multiple attempts from various engineers, radio reports, some other reports about the danger that he could be facing, taking that, and he ignored all of them. And so when you analyze it, I remember reading the history of that, I think there were 6 things that were put in front of him, or people tried to put in front of him that he brushed away, that could have averted the disaster. And so actually, at a time of crisis, someone who feels they've never made a mistake or is overly confident in themselves will be humbled whether they want to or not, and sometimes at terrible cost. And that is why I think having humility isn't being weak. I think that we sometimes miss that. Real humility is seen in people who are really strong. That's how you know there's a true humility. There's a strength to their character and their personality and everything else, but they're able to listen and learn and acknowledge where they've gone wrong. Real weakness is when we're so heavily defended, we can't engage in that process. And at that point, we become very poor leaders, and we actually spread the very thing that we're trying to stop. That's spreading to other people.
Thank you, Michael. Humility is strength. We need to listen and learn. And the fear of failure is crippling, not to ourselves, but to everybody around us. And I think if I could give one challenge today as leaders, beyond sort of tooting our organization's progress and all of our success and accolades, one of the real gifts that we can give each other during this pandemic is sharing ourselves, so people don't feel like they're suffering in silence, because we're all making those mistakes. On the next
Winston Churchill just said on that point, I remember he very famously said of one of his, Winston Churchill said, that man is very humble and he has a lot to be humble about. And I think that's what we think. It means you're not very good. As I say, real humility is seen in people who have done well, who are strong, who are key. But the reason the humility stands out isn't because they're weak or they failed in that sense. It's because of the way they've been able to handle their strength under control and appropriately. And we love that leadership, and there's a lack of it in this world right now. And it's something I regularly hope and pray for, that we'll recognize in the media how important that quality is within leadership, especially on a global platform.
Oh, thank you, Michael, for clarifying that. And I echo those sentiments. It is so critical, so important, and so needed. Tom, this next question is for you. As a leader, you have spoken about the need to manage one's emotions, and you alluded to it earlier in our conversation, in order to propel organizations forward. What emotions should a leader gain control of? And what emotions, if any, are actually helpful to bring to the boardroom table at this time?
Well, let me first say that I come at this topic as a slow learner. Anything I say, I've learned, and usually I only learn through pain. Every time things are going really well, I start to think I'm smart again, but when things aren't going well, I have to look at me. And if I look back over my life, I would say things that I had to deal with were fear and anger. And to me, they're both connected. So if I'm fearful about something, I'm going to get put off. And I heard a guy once say, I was angry because I was angry. I related to that because some days I've come to work and I've been angry, but give me a minute or two, I'll find the reason. But it's almost a mindset. So I think one has to jettison those emotions. I can't think of anything positive that has come in my life out of those two emotions. And as Michael said too, fear can just immobilize it. It can just scrunch you in a corner. And again, everybody's got all their theories on leadership, but part of being a leader is forgetting yourself. You know, I've had sort of little dalliance in the military over the years. I've been in Afghanistan and I've been a defense think tank and honorary colonel. And, you know, I've always thought of, if you were a commander, to be a commander in a parachute regiment, because you're not 80 miles back, you're with them right there experiencing the same danger. And I think that's an important thing. So you have to forget about yourself. And to me, again, the best business book by far and away is the Bible, because it's all in there about giving the extra. But one of the key things in leadership is servant leadership, that you have to put other people first. I remember a friend of mine, Colonel Pellerin of the Royal 22nd, a lieutenant gave him, or should I say a sergeant gave him a tip in his first task taking over a platoon. He said, "Do you have any tips in leadership?" He said, "Yes, the troops eat first." And that was the only thing, and sergeants are short of verbiage, and that was it. You take care of people first. That means you've got to forget yourself first. You've got to take care of them. And there's an old phrase that people rarely remember what you say. They always remember how you make them feel. A leader has to be trusted, has to be respected, but to do so, people have to be confident that you're competent as a leader, certainly, but also you have their interests at heart. So between these tug and pull of outside things, those self-centered emotions have to be jettisoned in some way. And listen, I don't do them every day. I mean, I think, Michael, you alluded to that. I built my career on failure, not on success. I'm like the Duracell bunny that just kept on going, no matter what has been going on. Learn from it, grow, and keep on going. And as an old trader, there's one adage in trading: if you make a mistake, clean it up fast and drive on, because your first mistake is your smallest. Don't hide it, don't ignore it, just clean it up and drive on. And emotions are also part of that. I had one of our young traders blow up a week or so ago. He made an error and he slammed the phone down and yelled and stormed out of the office. He came back and I explained to him when he came back, I said, you know, you are not paid for your emotions. Why don't you leave those at home and focus on what you are getting paid for? And I tried to make light of it because he did take it seriously. And I said, don't feel badly. That position you overbought, we're just going to pay you those shares and for your salary for the next year and a half. But, you know, it's diffusing the situation, encouraging him. He made a mistake, and, you know, treat these things as coaching moments. So all of those things require putting yourself a little bit on the shelf.
Thank you, Thomas.
And Thomas, because I wonder if I could, because I've heard this said from some people I've known who've been trained in special forces, who said to me, people sometimes think there's a real strength in anger. But actually, when you put someone in the heat of battle, you don't want them responding out of red hot anger. You actually want them to be under control, in control of their emotions and their mind at that critical moment. They're going to be much more effective at what they have to do and how they need to engage than the one who's, but the way we portray it in the media and in Hollywood is the really angry person who completely loses it, who will actually in the end win the battle. And I'm just not sure that's true to life. And it sounds like from your own experience, you see that not to be true either.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Tom and Michael. We need to forget ourselves. We need to serve others. We need to manage our anger. And I think equally, if not most important, we always need to be cognizant of how we've made somebody feel. They might not remember what we've said or spoken to them, but they will remember how we've made them feel. Michael, this next question is for you. Vince Lombardi talks about how fatigue makes cowards of us all. Fatigue makes cowards of us all. How can we protect ourselves and others from this fatigue, especially as we enter into this last quarter of the year, which is so incredibly significant?
Wow, what a great question. I'm reminded of someone who said their two life principles were never make big decisions when they're tired And number two, never doubt during the night what you know to be true during the day. And so during those dark nights of the soul, when you're doubting, don't doubt what was actually around you when you could actually see clearly. And I think those two things are linked, because when we're really tired and fatigued, we don't see things clearly anymore. We can't reason them clearly anymore, and we can't process things clearly anymore. And so now we add the fatigue into the problem. So I think it's very important to remember why it's so necessary for us to take a time of rest, every week. I think there's a reason why that pattern is given to us, because without it, we're not going to be able to recharge and regain. The fatigue just simply increasingly blurs the vision, and then we've seen it. And I can relate to what Thomas said. The worst decisions I've made in my life and the things I wish I could change the most is normally when I was very tired, normally upset as a result as well. Something happened and I responded. And I just wish, under any other circumstances, I would have responded differently. And you have to learn from those times. It is easy to convince ourselves we're more important and significant than we are. It's helpful to remember that we don't run the universe, although we like to think we do. And it's very important that we do learn to rest. It's part of the ways in which you enjoy the work of others around you when you're doing that, and you actually can recognize them too. So there is just the physical thing of develop a pattern and routine in your life, which will help you deal with that fatigue. And there's a reason why people are told to exercise and stuff like that. It's not necessarily so you can be stronger to work longer. It's you'll rest better when you do rest. The reason why it's good to be open and to develop the kinds of relationships Thomas was asking about, if you can trust your team, then it's easier to take a day off. If you can't trust them, or you rule through fear, you have no idea who your friends are, it's very hard to rest. I mean, tyrants are the most tired people I meet as I travel around the world. They've got no idea who their friends are. They feel they can't take the eye off the ball for 1 second, because if they do, maybe they'll get it in the back. So it is so useful to develop that pattern of figuring out how to rest, figuring out how to make sure that you're in that place where you can, and also building something. If you are as a leader, you will be building something, to build in a degree of trust and competence where you realize, and I very quickly realized, for me, there's a big difference between leadership and management. Management requires a lot of control and time. And you can lead from a distance, but you can't manage from a distance. If you have skilled enough people around you who are leaders as well, and you can release them so they're not dependent, but they're competent, it's easier again to rest, because you can say, you know what, I need this time off now. I can pick it up in the morning. There's a good team I can trust. There'll be times of huge crisis where you're going to have to make yourself available. But if you're living it every day, you haven't got that balance right, because you're not going to have 70 years of crisis or 50 years or however long it will be. There will be moments, but make sure it's a season. And if it's become a lifestyle, there's probably something wrong with the structure you built around you, that you can't now actually get the time you need to gain the perspective that's actually required for you to do well. And I think for me, it does come back to the things we talk about: fear and humility. If you're really fearful, you're going to be too scared to do it. And if there's no humility around you, you'll never convince yourself that you're not important enough. Everything will fall around without me. And I've seen so many people drive themselves into the ground because they've been convinced of that falsehood.
Thank you, Michael. Rest really does demonstrate that we are in control, and that we do trust our team, and we do trust God. Friends, we've come to the end of our time today. I want to thank you, Thomas, and thank you, Michael, for all of your poignant insights on leadership. There's been some beautiful themes today about leading in a spirit of humility, leading in a spirit of compassion, not leading in fear, but in love, and just simply serving others and bringing our curiosity and open posture to learning to the table. So thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Michael. Thank you. We are so deeply grateful to have had you today. For those who want to find out more information or continue to engage in this conversation, please feel free to visit www.rzim.ca or www.intriciti.ca. And for those who are interested in some additional leadership insights or for a bi-weekly market update, Caldwell Securities has done an excellent job of putting that all together. And you can view those at www.caldwellsecurities.com. We invite you to attend next week. Perhaps consider inviting a colleague or friend or family member. Next week's topic is on identity. Together, we will be exploring the concept of identity. So we thank you again, Thomas and Michael, and to our honored guests, and we look forward to welcoming you next Wednesday at 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Thank you.
Thanks, Savannah. Thank you.
Thank you.